reasons, bleatings, everybody. So I don't mention this very often because for whatever reason I'm really uncomfortable promoting my own work. I spend a lot of time enthusing about everybody else's books, and then I hardly ever mention that I also am an indie author aspiring to be a trad published author, but you know, it's a process. And I thought today, oh, I don't really know what the aim of this is, but I have a micro short story collection from Black Shuck Books Shadows series. It's called The End. This is an apocalyptic themed little collection. All the stories are connected. It's an assortment of horror and some more humorous horror tales, but yes, it's all one universe and linked and everything. And I was going to excuse me, sir. So what I was originally planning to do was I was going to read a story from this for you as a Christmas treat. I don't know how much of a treat it is. You'd have to be the judge. But then I thought, actually, I also have this collection, which sadly is out of print because the publisher closed down. So if you have a copy of this, it's now an antique, some sort of relic. And what I thought I would do is read a humorous short tale for you from this, just to give you a, you know, a sample of my excellent work and my sense of humour. And so this book was published in 2017, which means I very likely wrote this particular story the year before. It was published in an anthology called Deluge, Tales of the Great Flood, I think, and then here, and now it's in the ether and I'm going to read it to you. And I just want you to know that I haven't looked at this story in quite some time, but at the time that I wrote it, I found myself really funny, apparently. So let's see how well this has aged. This is S-Day. Picture, if you will, a little sod. Everyone knows one. Some of you might even have one. Hell, I bet a couple of you were right little sods yourselves. Now imagine that you are the parent of said little sod, and he's playing up. He's been noisy in the supermarket, he's thrown his toy on the floor, he ate straight from the pick and mix display, and now you have to pay for sweets you didn't even let him have. Oh great, now he's full of sugar too. That little sod has, say, 2 siblings, and they're starting to pick up on his behaviour. Oh no, you say to yourself, one of them is bad enough. Sometimes, though you'll deny this to everyone, you question why you had him in the first place. You'll be damned if his siblings become little sods too. So what do? You punish the lot of them, right? That makes sense. By punishing the innocent children, you ensure that they will become the enforcers of your rules. Little Sod's reign of terror is over if he ever wants his siblings to talk to him again. Kate Taylor, a very lovely 30-something-year-old, had one of those little sods. His name was Bobby, and I hated his 8-year-old guts. He was one of those kids that just had to be heard all the time. They could hear him on Earth, and we could hear him in the damn blasted heavens too. His shrill little voice was always demanding something, and Kate always caved. That would cease the torrent of verbal stabbings to our eardrums, if only for a while. Well, one day, Kate decided that enough was enough. She wasn't going to feel guilty about being a single parent with a single income anymore. Bobby needed discipline, and that's how it all started, really. He made a request, nay, a demand, and she refused him. This was the starting point for what's known on Earth as S-Day. Planet dwellers think the S stands for soup, but we think it stands for sod. On that fateful day, I was lying in a cloud with my hands clasped over my ears, wondering why God had created Bobby Taylor in the first place. Not that I want to question the Lord, but I think if he were being honest, he'd admit that Bobby Taylor was a mistake. You see, kids have a system. When they want something, they ask a parent. When that parent refuses, they go to the other parent, then their most gullible grandparent. If neither the second parent nor the grandparent options are available, they turn to Santa. But what if it's not Christmas, I hear you ask? Well, in that case, they start praying. And why wouldn't they? They're taught that God hears all their prayers, that he loves all his children, and that he performs miracles. When Kate refused Bobby's request for chicken soup, out of principle, it wasn't even lunchtime, he bypassed all other routes and went straight for the big guy. And I'll tell you this for nothing now. Whether he wants to or not, it's true that he does indeed hear every prayer. Every single one of them. So anyway, Bobby started praying. Relentlessly. God was having a bad day at the office. It was a classic case of too many prayers and not enough time. There was a war that was, well, mid-war. Some terrible virus was making the rounds. The Big Brother final was coming up, and that's always a busy one. So you can imagine how annoying Bobby's steady stream of requests became. They were coming in fast and loud, interrupting other prayers, putting God off his train of thought, and generally causing a nuisance. God tried to mute him, but it was no good. Bobby was determined to be heard. He was a loud kid in general, but when he wanted something, man, he could be persistent. We could all hear him way up in the clouds. Dear God, I really love chicken soup. Please send me a lifetime supply. Dear God, I'm hungry for chicken soup. God, why aren't you answering me? Gee, where my soup at? Oh God, I know you can hear me. And then the kicker, dear God, if you loved me, you'd send me the soup I asked for. I took one look at God's face and knew that the planet was doomed. 10 plagues aside, God can normally control his temper. You wouldn't believe how often he hears, if you love me, then you'll... It drives him absolutely bonkers. That little sod, God said, massaging his temples. If he wants chicken soup, I'll give him chicken soup. And so it rained. At first, Bobby was pretty excited when he felt the warm splash from above on his skin. He got more excited still when he licked it off his arm and declared that it was raining his favourite canned food. But then it poured, and it poured just on Bobby. Gallons of the stuff. The kid tried to run, but you try running across chicken soup covered ground. It got real slippery real fast, and the next thing he knew, Bobby was arse over tit in a considerably sized puddle of creamy goodness. Then came the lumps of chicken. Lumps the size of which you've never seen. Alright, they weren't lumps, they were whole chickens. Frozen ones. You can imagine what frozen chickens falling from the sky can do to a skull, especially when, technically speaking, they're not falling, but rather being thrown like javelins from the arm of the Almighty. That was the end of Bobby Taylor, and it would have been the end of the whole episode if Kate Taylor had just kept her trap shut. God had had his fun. He'd vented some frustration, and he'd rid the world of the biggest little sod there was. I'm sure you can sympathise with the Holy One when I tell you that Kate Taylor kicked off. I know what you're thinking. Most parents would, right? She made this big fuss in front of the spectators who'd witnessed the chicken skull fiasco. She claimed that Bobby was taken before his time, that God was an unfair so-and-so, and that she was turning her back on him forever. I suppose any parent would, but the thing was, when God oh so literally answered Bobby's prayer, he was answering Kate's too. Throughout the whole time we could hear Bobby rambling about his soup, we could also hear a very faint but persistent pleading cry for help from Kate. I'm sure looking back on it now that she actually used the phrase, just kill the little well, you can fill in the rest. As soon as she saw those chickens come down, she smiled. We all saw it. And then she had the gall to stand there wailing that it was a tragedy. Well, that really tied God in a knot. So he kept raining soup and he kept throwing chickens. Remember that parent I mentioned earlier, the one who punishes all of their children for the crimes of one? Yeah, so that's what happened. Bobby lit the match, Kate dropped it on the kindling, and then God lost it for a minute and poured on the gasoline. For 40 days and 40 nights, the people of Earth endured warm soup floods and frozen chicken-related deaths. When the puddles started to coalesce into lakes, we tried to stop him, but he was in no mood to be told what to do. He had had it with the trivial prayers, expectations, and complaints from his children. I tried to tell him that they had learned their lesson, and that perhaps flooding the world with soup was a little overboard. His reply was that in order to prove that he loves his children equally, he has to treat them all the same. If one needs a good smiting, then they all do. The results of the flood were pretty bad for the majority. As you can imagine, due to the lack of warning, there was no time to build an ark. There wasn't even enough time to assemble a raft, though a few did manage to blow up some inflatables. That's not to say that there weren't any survivors, though if you want to be technical about it, Este was what is considered a cull. Humanity has taken a somewhat bizarre turn since then. In 1,000 years or so, I can't wait to see what future humans make of the cave drawings of those falling chickens. Bobby, the absolute sod, has gone down in history as a martyr. Yeah, we can believe it either. With each of God's lessons, humanity takes something valuable away to progress with, but in this case they were left a little perplexed. Scholars continue to try to make sense of Este, but the only conclusion drawn so far is that chicken soup is now banned. I'm hoping that the next little sod prays for carrots. I can't stand carrots. The end. So, I mean, I think it's okay. In fact, I'm considering republishing this book. So you can be the judge. Feel free to be as harsh as you want in the comments if you have any thoughts about Estee. I am considering republishing this collection with some more stories. I'll probably make it about 3 times as thick as it currently is. It's quite svelte, really. It's about 100 and something pages, 120 odd pages. The other stories in this book, let me know if you're interested in hearing any of these or having a reprint. Maybe I could just post them on the website. I've got Bitey Backman, which is about a night watchman in a mental health facility and the world's shortest and most disappointing zombie apocalypse ever, which is a comedy horror. Bits and Bobs is about an unfortunate guy called Stephen Plunkett who's quite easy to dislike, and he works at a body farm. Something unfortunate befalls him. Siren is a straight-up horror story about a lonely little girl that makes friends with something that's in the lake outside her house. Now You See Them is the first ever thing I had published. It's a flash fiction about little eyeball-eating monsters. Skin it was quite popular for this book when it came out. That's a straight-up horrible story that I can't believe came out of my mind now, but it's about a teenager who gets bitten by a spider, and there's a lot of psychological horror going on. Barry's Last Day is about a guy who hates his job, hates his wife, hates the guy that's replacing him in his job, and he accidentally ingests some magic mushrooms one day. And then 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, which was probably a more appropriate story to read this month, now that I think about it, is an homage to Pet Sematary, starring a Christmas tree. So that's just a little glimpse into the inner workings of the fiction that I conjure up, and I hope that you were entertained. Let me know if you want this reprinted, if you want me to read anything else from it, if you know any good audiobook narrators that could do a better job than me, and I will see you again soon. I hope this departure from my normal content was okay, and I'll see you next time. Bleed!